Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our video series on SAT verbal hacks. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a words in context question, which is just a fancy way of saying a vocabulary question. These questions always appear at the very beginning of the SAT verbal modules, and sometimes they can be frustrating for students because they're just going to present you with vocab words that are obviously not ones that you use every day. But if we just follow some general advice and tips, you can set yourself up for success with these kinds of questions. So first thing to note is that these questions always are going to be worded along these lines. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? As you can see here, we have a short text and then we have a blank. So we're responsible for filling in that blank with the vocab word that best fits. Now, some tips for how to approach these. The first thing that is really helpful to do is to just sort of scan the text and pay the closest attention to the sentence with the blank. In this case, that's our final sentence. Typically, you don't necessarily need to understand all of the content or ideas in these passages. It's more so about looking for the general structure and clues around the blank to kind of give you an impression of what kind of word you're looking for. Speaking of clues, the next thing you're going to do is go ahead and look for context clues. Context clues kind of refer to words and phrases in the surrounding text that hint toward the word's meaning. So you're going to be looking for important words that seem like they sort of imply what the word in the blank should mean or suggest. Then after you finish that, it's really helpful to, even before you look at the answers, to predict your own answer choice and then select the word that most closely matches it. The reason why that's helpful is because if you put your own answer choice or word in this blank, sometimes it's going to be really simple to take a look at the answers and just select the word that most closely matches or is a synonym for the word that you have in mind. Now, let's go ahead and just sort of apply these in context. I'm going to focus mainly on the first two steps for right now. So, scanning this text, let's go ahead and read through it. In her lab at Princeton University, molecular biologist Bonnie Bassler found evidence of a phenomenon called quorum sensing in a bacterial species called Vibrio harvii. She also discovered that V. harvii release an autoinducer, which Bassler has described as a chemical trade language. Here's our most important sentence. This makes it possible for bacteria to blank with other species of bacteria in their vicinity. So first thing I'm noticing with this passage is it's scientific, right? The thing to note when you have a passage like this is you don't really need to pay attention to all the technicality. So, a term like quorum sensing or autoinducer or those essentially just those two words. You don't really need to pay attention to those as much because those are just sort of like the really like nitty-gritty details. You really just need to pay attention to the general ideas that the passage is talking about. So if I'm looking for these context clue words, right? I'm noticing that whatever this quorum sensing thing is it's really just a language, right? It says a trade language. So when I think of trade, I think of interactions and I think of like an exchange, right? And then with language, it's like exchange of words and like communication, basically. So whatever this biological thing is, it seems to be just about communication. And I also see that it mentions like vicinity, so like closeness between the different bacteria. So that goes back to this idea of communicating with the surrounding bacteria to kind of like trade messages and communicate information. So that being said, I probably would put a word like communicate in this blank. That's kind of what I would put as my own prediction. So the next step would be to take a look at these answer choices and select the one that most closely means communicate. Now I'm going to pause here and think about something that may happen to you as a student as you're taking the SAT. And that's going to be there being some unfamiliar words in the answer options. So words that you have no idea what they mean. You're probably going to encounter that. Here's some helpful tools that you can apply in that situation. So take note of any prefixes or suffixes that you see. Prefixes meaning those like little chunks of words that come before, and suffixes are the ones that come after that kind of give you a general sense of what that word could mean. So for instance, if I take a look at these answer choices, inter is an example of a prefix. Inter meaning like between. So that can give you at least a little bit of a hint as to what the word means. Then you might want to look for word roots. That just means like the sort of like base foundational word that this word stems from. And, you know, assuming you don't have like a solid foundation in like Latin or Greek, which is where a lot of our words come from, the question really to ask yourself is, do any parts of that word look or sound familiar? I am going to circle back to this word interrelate because here we can see this root, right? Relate. In this case, that's a pretty familiar word to us. So this interrelate, it seems like it's relating between, right? Because inter means between, relate is kind of like the communication between two things. Now, the last thing to do if you are in a bind with, you know, not knowing what the words mean is to think about connotation. So connotation is basically the energy of the word. I often describe it as like the vibe of the word. Oftentimes, just by like saying the word out loud to yourself or maybe saying it in your head, you can usually get a sense of what the word's connotation is. You'll usually be able to, based on how it sounds, determine whether it sounds or feels positively charged or feels negatively charged. So if you notice like a lot of harsh consonants like k and t and ch, that might indicate that it's more of like a negative word. And positive words would sort of kind of have like almost like an upbeat feel to them. Now that's just like a general pattern that you might notice. That's not like foolproof by any means, but again, you're just trying to help yourself out with tools and strategies. So I'm going to circle back now to my answer choices. So I happened to notice as I was going through these unfamiliar word like strategies that this word interrelate kind of seems the closest to what my predicted word was, which is communicate. Because inter means between, again, that's a prefix, and then relate, we know what relate means. It's like to connect between two parties. So between, connections between seems really exactly what this passage is talking about, right? Because it's talking about language between bacteria and the way that they communicate with each other. So right off the bat, because I see this answer choice and it seems really strong, that's what I'm going to go ahead and select as my answer choice. And that is in fact the correct answer. So again, to recap, when you're looking at vocab questions, be sure to take a look at the text, get a general feel for it, pay close attention to the sentence with the blank, and then think about a word that you yourself would put there. That prediction is going to set you up for success and maybe a quick response with your answer choices. If the words there are unfamiliar to you, it's definitely helpful to use these strategies: prefixes, suffixes, word roots, and connotation. So hopefully you find this helpful as you're tackling these words and context questions, and make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Take care.